A millionaire finds a little beggar girl sleeping in the back seat of his luxury car. Moved by her situation, he decides to take her to his mansion. One day, returning home early from work, the millionaire is shocked by what the girl did to his disabled wife. The sun was setting on the horizon of New York City, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. When Richard Thompson, a 45-year-old businessman and owner of a prestigious luxury hotel chain, parked his imported car in front of the mansion where he lived. He sighed deeply before getting out of the vehicle, knowing that another tense night awaited him at home. Richard was a tall man with an athletic build and graying hair that gave him a distinguished air. His face, marked by small expression lines, revealed not only his age, but also the worries he carried. Wearing an impeccable suit, he adjusted his tie before entering the house, as if preparing for another business meeting, not to meet his wife. As he opened the door, he was greeted by the sepulchral silence that had become the hallmark of his residence in recent months. The luxurious and impersonal decor contrasted with the lack of human warmth that permeated the environment. "Emily?" he called, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. Emily Thompson, his wife of 15 years, appeared at the top of the stairs. She was a stunning woman, with long blonde hair and piercing green eyes. She wore a silk outfit and high heels, as if always ready for a social event. "Oh, you're home," she said, her voice cold and distant. "I thought you were going to work late again." Richard climbed the stairs, attempting a smile. "I decided to come home early today. I thought we could have dinner together." Emily arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Dinner? We have nothing at home. You know I don't cook." "We can order something," Richard suggested, feeling the familiar sense of discouragement settle in his chest. "Or go out to eat if you prefer." "I'm not hungry," Emily replied, turning to go back to the bedroom. "Besides, I have a charity event to attend later." Richard followed her to the bedroom, watching as she sat at the vanity and began to touch up her makeup. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice laden with pent-up emotion. "About what, Richard?" she asked, without taking her eyes off the mirror. "About us, about our life together," he replied, sitting on the edge of the king-size bed they rarely shared these days. "I feel like we're growing more and more distant." Emily sighed, putting down her lipstick and finally looking at her husband. "What do you want me to say? We've been married for 15 years. It's normal for passion to cool a bit." "It's not just passion, Emily. It's like we're two strangers living in the same house," Richard argued, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Don't you think we could try, I don't know, do something together? Travel, maybe?" "Travel? What for?" "I already know all the hotels in your chain," she replied disdainfully. "Besides, I have my social commitments here. I can't just drop everything and go gallivanting around as if we were newlyweds." Richard felt a pang of pain at her words. "What about having a child?" he asked, touching on a subject he had long wanted to discuss. "I think it would be good for us, for our family." Emily's gaze hardened instantly. "We've talked about this, Richard. I don't want children. I never did. I thought I made that clear when we got married." "I know, but I thought maybe you might change your mind over time," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Well, I haven't," Emily replied dryly. "I'm satisfied with my life as it is. If you're not, maybe you should reconsider your priorities." With those words, she stood up and walked to the closet, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. He sat there for a few minutes, feeling the weight of loneliness in his own marriage. Finally, he got up and left the room, heading downstairs towards his study. On the way, he met Maria, the housemaid, a middle-aged woman with a kind face and compassionate eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," she greeted. "Would you like me to prepare something for dinner?" Richard smiled slightly, grateful for the genuine concern in her voice. "No need, Maria. I think I'll work a bit in the study." Maria nodded, but before she could walk away, Richard called her again. "Maria, are you happy here?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. The maid seemed surprised for a moment, but then answered honestly, "Yes, Mr. Thompson, you've always been very good to me. It's just, sometimes I think this house could be more cheerful, you know?" Richard nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Thank you, Maria. Good night." As he entered his study, Richard couldn't help but think about Maria's words. His house, despite all the luxury, lacked joy, life. He sat in his leather chair, looking out the window at the well-manicured but empty garden. It was at that moment that he made a decision. Tomorrow, he would do something different. He would buy a new car, not to impress Emily or keep up appearances, but for himself. A small act of rebellion against the suffocating routine his life had become. As he turned on the computer to check some emails, Richard could not imagine that this seemingly simple decision was about to change his life in ways he could never have predicted. Fate, as always, had its own plans, and the next day would bring an encounter that would transform not only his life but his heart in deep and irreversible ways. The next morning, Richard woke up early, determined to follow through on his decision to buy a new car. The New York City sky was exceptionally blue, as if the universe was conspiring to make this day special. After a solitary breakfast, Emily was still asleep after returning late from the charity event. He left feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The luxury car dealership was located in the upscale Upper East Side neighborhood. Richard walked among the gleaming cars, his eyes scanning the elegant and modern lines of the vehicles. A salesman approached, immediately recognizing him. "Mr. Thompson, what a pleasure to have you here. How can I assist you today?" Richard smiled politely. "I'm thinking of changing cars. Something more casual, perhaps?" The salesman nodded enthusiastically, guiding him to a series of sports models. While they were discussing the technical specifications of a red convertible, Richard felt a strange restlessness, as if something was calling him. His eyes drifted to a silver SUV parked further away. "Can we see that one?" he asked, interrupting the salesman's animated discourse. Approaching the SUV, Richard noticed it was a more family-friendly model, spacious and comfortable. It wasn't exactly what he had in mind when he left the house, but something about that car attracted him. "Excellent choice, Mr. Thompson," the salesman commented, opening the driver's door. "This model is perfect for family trips, with plenty of space and comfort." The words family trips echoed in Richard's mind, reminding him of long-forgotten dreams. He circled the vehicle, admiring its details, when something unusual caught his attention. In the back seat, partially hidden by a blanket, was a small figure. "What's that?" Richard asked, leaning in to look closer. The salesman, confused, followed his gaze. "My God!" he exclaimed, surprised. "There shouldn't be anything in there." Richard carefully opened the back door, revealing a sleeping girl curled up on the seat. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with messy brown hair and simple, worn clothes. Her face, even in sleep, seemed to carry a deep sadness. "Who are you, little one?" Richard asked softly, gently touching the girl's shoulder. She woke up startled, her brown eyes wide with fear. I'm sorry," she stammered, trying to curl up even further into the corner of the seat. I just needed a place to sleep." Richard's heart tightened. The salesman, still stunned, was muttering something about calling security, but Richard stopped him with a gesture. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Sarah," replied the girl, her voice almost a whisper. "Sarah, where are your parents?" The question made the girl's eyes fill with tears. "I don't have parents," she answered, her voice choked. They've been gone for a long time." Richard felt a wave of compassion wash over him. Without thinking twice, he extended his hand to Sarah. "It's okay now. You're safe." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but something in Richard's gentle gaze made her accept his hand. She timidly got out of the car, still trembling a little. The salesman, recovering from the initial shock, asked, "What should we do, Mr. Thompson? Should I call the authorities?" Richard thought for a moment. The idea of handing Sarah over to a system that could be cold and impersonal deeply troubled him. "No," he decided. "I'll take responsibility for her for now. We'll resolve this in the best way possible." Turning to Sarah, he crouched down to her level. "Sarah, would you like to come with me? I promise I'll take care of you and try to help find you a safe home." The girl's eyes lit up with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Can I? Richard nodded, smiling gently. "Yes, you can. Let's start by buying some new clothes and something for you to eat. How about that?" Sarah agreed timidly, a small smile appearing on her lips for the first time. Turning to the stunned salesman, Richard said, "I'll take this SUV. Prepare the papers, please. I'll be back later to sign them." As they left the dealership, Richard holding Sarah's hand, he couldn't help but feel that his life was about to change drastically. The small hand in his brought a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. On the way to the nearest shopping mall, Richard made a quick call to his assistant, cancelling all appointments for the day. Today his priority was Sarah. The afternoon sun was already setting when Richard parked the new SUV in the garage of his mansion. Beside him, Sarah slept peacefully, hugging the teddy bear he had bought for her. For a moment, Richard sat there, observing the girl through the rearview mirror reflection, feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Sarah," he called softly, touching the girl's shoulder. "We're here." Sarah's brown eyes opened slowly, blinking a few times before focusing on Richard. For an instant, fear passed across her face, as if she feared it was all just a dream. But seeing Richard's gentle smile, she visibly relaxed. "Is this your house?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with admiration as she saw the imposing mansion through the car window. Richard nodded, feeling a twinge of discomfort. The grandeur of his residence, which had once brought him pride, now seemed cold and ostentatious in the face of Sarah's innocence. "Yes, this is where I live. Shall we go in?" As they got out of the car, Richard picked up the shopping bags with one hand and held Sarah's hand with the other. Together, they walked to the main entrance. Before they could reach the door, it opened, revealing Maria, the maid, with a look of surprise on her face. "Mr. Thompson, we weren't expecting you back so early," and her voice trailed off as she noticed Sarah. "Who is this lovely girl?" Richard took a deep breath, preparing for the explanations he would have to give. "Maria, this is Sarah. She'll be staying with us for a while. Sarah, this is Maria. She takes care of the house and is a very special person to me." Sarah, partially hiding behind Richard, waved timidly to Maria. The maid, quickly recovering from her initial surprise, opened a warm smile. "Welcome, Sarah. It's good to have you here with us," said Maria, her maternal tone immediately putting the girl more at ease. Richard felt momentary relief at Maria's positive reaction. "Maria, could you prepare one of the guest rooms for Sarah, and maybe a light snack? I'm sure she's tired after such a busy day." "Of course, Mr. Thompson." "Leave it to me," Maria promptly replied, casting a curious look at her employer before heading up the stairs. While Maria took care of the preparations, Richard guided Sarah through the house, showing her the different rooms. The girl looked at everything with a mixture of admiration and shyness, her small hands tightly clutching the teddy bear. "And this will be your room for now," said Richard, opening the door to one of the guest rooms that Maria had just prepared. It was a spacious room, with a large canopy bed, silk curtains, and a view of the garden. Sarah hesitantly entered the room, her eyes scanning every detail. Is it all for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard felt his heart tighten. "Yes, Sarah. All of this is for you. You're safe here." At that moment, they heard the sound of high heels in the hallway. Richard tensed, recognizing Emily's steps. Seconds later, his wife appeared at the door of the room, her green eyes narrowing as she saw Sarah. "Richard, what is the meaning of this?" Emily asked, her cold voice cutting through the air like a blade. Richard placed a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder before turning to his wife. "Emily, this is Sarah. She'll be staying with us for a while." Emily crossed her arms, her gaze alternating between Richard and the girl. "And may I know why? Since when did we turn our house into a shelter?" "It's a long story," Richard replied, trying to stay calm. "Can we talk about this in private?" Emily cast one last critical look at Sarah before turning away. "Very well, in the study, now." As Emily walked away, Richard crouched down to Sarah's level. "Stay here, all right? Maria will come soon with a snack for you. I'll be back soon." Sarah nodded, her eyes full of concern. Richard gave her a reassuring smile before following Emily to the study. As soon as the door closed behind them, Emily turned, her eyes flashing with anger. "What madness is this, Richard? Who is that girl, and why did you bring her to our house?" Richard took a deep breath, preparing to explain the situation. He told Emily about how he found Sarah at the dealership, about her escape from the orphanage, and his decision to help her. "Have you lost your mind?" Emily exclaimed when he finished. "We can't just pick up a child from the street and bring her home. There are laws, Richard, procedures." "I know, Emily," Richard replied, trying to keep calm. "But I couldn't leave her alone. She needs help, a safe place." "And you think that place is here with us?" Emily laughed humorlessly. "We can barely keep our own marriage working, Richard. How do you expect us to take care of a child? Emily's words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. He knew their marriage was in crisis, but hearing her say it so openly hurt more than he had imagined. Maybe this is exactly what we need, he said, surprising himself with his own words. And maybe caring for someone, doing something meaningful, can help us find purpose again. Emily stared at him, incredulous. Are you suggesting we use an orphaned child as couples therapy? That's absurd, Richard. That's not what I'm saying, Richard replied, frustrated. I'm saying that helping Sarah is the right thing to do. And if it makes us reevaluate our priorities, maybe it's something positive for all of us. A tense silence settled between them. Emily looked away, her fingers nervously tapping on the arm of the chair where she was sitting. How long? She finally asked. What? How long will she stay? Richard hesitated. I don't know. As long as it takes to find a suitable solution for her. Emily let out an exasperated sigh. Very well, Richard. She can stay. But don't expect me to play the doting mother. That girl is your responsibility. With those words, Emily got up and left the study, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. He knew the battle was far from over, but for now, Sarah had a place to stay. Taking a deep breath, Richard prepared to return to the room where Sarah was waiting. He knew the following days would be challenging, but something inside him was changing. For the first time in a long time, he felt he was doing something truly important. With determined steps, Richard left the study, ready to face whatever the future held for him and little Sarah. The days following Sarah's arrival were a mix of joy and tension in the Thompson mansion. Richard, determined to provide a welcoming environment for the girl, spent more and more time at home, reorganizing his work schedule to be present. On a sunny morning, Richard found Sarah in the garden, fascinated by the butterflies flying among the flowers. He approached quietly, smiling at the girl's wonder-struck look. Do you like butterflies, Sarah? He asked, sitting next to her on the garden bench. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. They're so beautiful and free, she replied, her eyes shining. At the orphanage, we hardly ever saw butterflies. Richard felt a pang in his heart as he remembered Sarah's previous life. Well, here you can see as many as you want, he said gently. What do you think about planting some flowers that attract more butterflies? Sarah's face lit up at the idea. Can we really? Of course we can, Richard smiled. Let's ask Maria to help us choose the best seeds. As they walked back to the house, Richard noticed Emily watching them from the bedroom window, her face a mask of indifference. He waved to her, but Emily simply moved away, letting the curtains fall. Inside the house, Maria greeted them with her usual warm smile. Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Good morning, Sarah. Breakfast is ready. Maria, said Richard, Sarah and I were thinking about planting some flowers to attract butterflies. Could you help us choose the best ones? Maria's eyes lit up. What a wonderful idea. I know some perfect flowers for that. We can go to the flower shop later if you'd like. Sarah jumped for joy, impulsively hugging Maria. The maid, surprised at first, returned the hug affectionately. Richard observed the scene, feeling a mixture of joy and sadness. It was evident that Sarah was flourishing with the affection and attention she received, but he couldn't help thinking about how much the girl had been deprived of this before. During breakfast, Emily joined them, her face a mask of forced politeness. Good morning, she said, sitting at the table and immediately picking up her cell phone. Good morning, dear, Richard replied. Sarah and I are going to plant some flowers in the garden today. Would you like to join us? Emily looked up from her phone, her gaze cold. I have a charity luncheon today, Richard, you know that. Richard sighed, trying not to show his disappointment. Of course, I had forgotten. The rest of breakfast passed in tense silence, broken only by Sarah's occasional enthusiastic comments about butterflies and flowers. Later that day, as Richard and Sarah were planting the new flowers in the garden, with Maria's patient help, Richard's phone rang. It was his assistant informing him about an emergency meeting with important investors. Richard looked at Sarah, who was smiling as she carefully placed a lavender seedling in the soil. He knew he couldn't miss the meeting, but the idea of leaving Sarah troubled him. Sarah, he called softly, I need to go to the office for a few hours. Will you be okay here with Maria? Sarah's smile faltered for a moment, but she nodded bravely. Yes, I'll be fine. Can we finish planting the flowers when you get back? Of course we can, Richard promised, feeling guilty about having to leave. I'll be back as soon as possible." As he prepared to leave, Richard couldn't help but notice how his perspective had changed. Before, his priority had always been work, but now the idea of leaving Sarah, even for a few hours, deeply bothered him. At the office, Richard had difficulty concentrating on the meeting. His thoughts kept returning to Sarah and the changes she had brought to his life. When he finally managed to end the meeting, it was already late afternoon. Upon arriving home, Richard found Sarah asleep on the living room couch, a storybook open on her lap. Maria was sitting nearby, knitting silently. "How is she?" Richard asked in a low voice. Maria smiled. "She missed you, but she was very brave. We spent the afternoon reading stories and tending to the flowers." Richard sat down next to Sarah, gently stroking her hair. The girl stirred, slowly opening her eyes. "You're back," she murmured, sleepy. "I'm back," Richard replied, feeling a wave of tenderness. "I'm sorry I took so long." Sarah sat up, rubbing her eyes. "It's okay, Maria told me very nice stories, but—" She hesitated, biting her lip. "But what?" Richard encouraged. "But I wished you were here," Sarah completed, her voice almost a whisper. Sarah's words hit Richard like lightning. At that moment, he realized that his priorities were irrevocably changing. The girl he had found by chance was becoming an essential part of his life. "Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I promise I'll try to be more present. You're very important to me." The girl smiled, hugging him tightly. Over Sarah's head, Richard saw Emily standing in the living room entrance, observing the scene with an unreadable expression. Their gazes met for a moment, and Richard could see a mixture of emotions in his wife's eyes. Confusion, resentment, but also, perhaps, a hint of regret. That night, as he put Sarah to bed, Richard reflected on the changes in his life. He knew there were still many challenges ahead: Sarah's legal situation, Emily's resistance, the demands of his work. But for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. As he gently closed the door to Sarah's room, Richard made a silent promise to himself and to the girl who had so unexpectedly entered his life. He would do everything in his power to give Sarah the loving home she deserved, no matter what obstacles he had to face. The weeks passed, and Sarah's presence brought a new dynamic to the Thompson mansion. Richard, increasingly involved with the girl, began to reorganize his professional life to spend more time at home. This change, although gratifying for him, did not go unnoticed by Emily, who viewed her husband's transformation with growing discomfort. On a Saturday afternoon, while Sarah played in the garden under Maria's attentive care, Richard decided to approach Emily, who was sitting on the porch, absent-mindedly flipping through a fashion magazine. "Emily," he began, sitting down next to her, "we need to talk." She lowered the magazine, her green eyes meeting his with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "About what, Richard?" "About how you're neglecting your business because of that girl?" Richard took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm not neglecting anything, Emily. I'm just readjusting my priorities." "Priorities?" Emily laughed humorlessly. "And what about me? Where do I fit into these new priorities of yours?" The question caught Richard by surprise. It was true that he and Emily had grown even more distant since Sarah's arrival, but he hadn't expected her to feel neglected. "You have always been and will always be important to me, Emily," he said, reaching out to touch her hand, but she pulled away. "It doesn't seem like it," Emily replied, her voice laden with bitterness. "Since that girl arrived, it's as if I don't exist anymore. You cancelled our trip to Paris, you barely attend social events with me." "Emily," Richard gently interrupted, "Sarah needs us. She's been through so much." "And what about us?" Emily cut him off. "What happened to our plans, Richard? Our life?" At that moment, they heard a noise coming from the garden. Turning, they saw Sarah running towards them, her face lit up with a smile. "Uncle Richard!" "Aunt Emily, look what I found!" exclaimed the girl, carefully holding something in her hands. When Sarah opened her hands, she revealed a small blue butterfly, its delicate wings fluttering softly. Richard smiled, enchanted by Sarah's enthusiasm, but noticed that Emily moved away slightly, her face a mask of indifference. "It's beautiful, Sarah," said Richard, crouching down to get a better look. "But remember, we can't keep the butterfly. It needs to be free." Sarah nodded, understanding. Carefully, she opened her hands completely, allowing the butterfly to fly away. They all watched in silence as the small blue insect danced in the air, moving away. "Aunt Emily," Sarah said shyly, turning to the woman who remained distant. "Did you like the butterfly?" Emily hesitated, her gaze alternating between the hopeful girl and Richard. For a moment, Richard saw something soften in his wife's eyes, but soon the cold expression returned. "Yes, it was pretty," Emily replied, her voice controlled. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have commitments." With that, Emily got up and went into the house, leaving Richard and Sarah on the porch. The girl looked at Richard, confused. "Aunt Emily doesn't like me, does she?" Sarah asked, her voice sad. Richard felt his heart tighten. "That's not it, sweetie," he said, hugging her. "Emily just needs time to get used to the changes. She likes you, she just has difficulty showing it." But as he comforted Sarah, Richard couldn't help but worry. The situation with Emily was becoming increasingly tense, and he knew he needed to do something about it. That night, after putting Sarah to bed, Richard found Emily in the bedroom packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" he asked, alarmed. Emily continued folding clothes without looking at him. "I'm going to spend a few days at the beach house. I need space to think." "Emily, please," Richard pleaded. "Let's talk about this. We can't go on like this." Finally, Emily turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You know what the problem is, Richard? You never asked me if I wanted to be a mother. You simply brought that girl into our house and expected me to accept it." Emily's words hit Richard like a punch. He realized with painful clarity that he had been selfish in his decision to bring Sarah home without fully considering Emily's feelings. I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You're right. I should have talked to you first. But Emily, Sarah has changed our lives in a way I never imagined possible. She brought light into this house, into my life. I can't just send her away." Emily closed the suitcase with a heavy sigh. "I know you can't, Richard. And that's why I need this time. I need to understand if there's still room for me in this new life you're building." Richard took a step towards her, but Emily raised her hand, stopping him. "Please, don't make this harder. I'll be back in a few days. Until then, take care of Sarah." With those words, Emily picked up her suitcase and left the room, leaving Richard alone with his turbulent thoughts. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, feeling the weight of his decisions. At that moment, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Maria, her face a mask of concern. "Mr. Thompson," she said gently. "Is everything all right?" Richard looked at her, grateful for the comforting presence of the maid who had been part of his life for so long. "I don't know, Maria. I think I've made a big mistake." Maria entered the room, sitting beside him. "You followed your heart in helping Sarah. That can never be a mistake." "But at what cost?" Richard asked, his voice laden with doubt. Maria placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Things will work out, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Emily just needs time. And meanwhile, you have a lovely girl who needs your love and care very much." Maria's words brought some comfort to Richard. He knew the coming days would be difficult, but he also knew he couldn't give up. Sarah depended on him now, and he was determined to be the father she deserved, even if it meant facing challenges in his marriage. With a determined sigh, Richard stood up. "Thank you, Maria. You always know what to say." As Maria withdrew, Richard walked to Sarah's room. He quietly opened the door and watched the girl sleeping peacefully. At that moment, he renewed his silent promise. He would do everything in his power to give Sarah the loving home she deserved, no matter what obstacles he had to face. The days following Emily's departure were a whirlwind of emotions for Richard. He strived to maintain an appearance of normalcy for Sarah, but Emily's absence weighed on the house like a dark cloud. On a sunny afternoon, while Richard was working in his home office, he heard a soft knock on the door. It was Sarah, her brown eyes full of concern. "Uncle Richard," she said timidly, "can I come in?" Richard smiled, moving away from the desk. "Of course you can, sweetheart." "What's the matter?" Sarah entered, nervously playing with the hem of her shirt. Is it because of me that Aunt Emily left?" Richard's heart tightened at the question. He knelt down to Sarah's level, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. "No, Sarah, it's not your fault. Sometimes adults need time to think, to understand their feelings. Aunt Emily just needs some time alone." Sarah nodded, But Richard could see she wasn't entirely convinced. But what if she doesn't come back? What if I have to leave? The question caught Richard by surprise. He hadn't realized how insecure Sarah was about her stay there. "Sarah, look at me," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now, and I promise I'll take care of you no matter what happens." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she hugged Richard tightly. "I love you, Uncle Richard," she murmured against his chest. Richard felt his heart fill with an emotion he couldn't name. "I love you too, Sarah," he replied, his voice choked up. At that moment, Maria appeared at the office door, her face a mixture of emotion and concern. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "there's a call for you. It's from the lawyer." Richard stood up, trying to maintain his composure. "Sarah, why don't you go play in the garden while I take this call? I promise we can do something together afterwards." Sarah nodded, wiping the tears with the back of her hands before leaving. Richard watched her go, feeling a mixture of love and apprehension. Picking up the phone, Richard heard his lawyer's grave voice. "Mr. Thompson, we have news about Sarah's situation." Richard felt his heart race. "What kind of news?" "Well," the lawyer continued, "we've managed to locate some distant relatives of Sarah's, an aunt who lives in the countryside." Richard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "And what does that mean?" "Legally, she has priority in Sarah's custody," the lawyer explained, "but there are complications. She doesn't have ideal financial conditions and lives in a remote area, with few educational opportunities for Sarah." Richard sat heavily in his chair, his mind a whirlwind. "What can we do?" "Well, there are two options," said the lawyer. "We can initiate an adoption process, arguing that you can offer better conditions for Sarah. Or we can try to reach an agreement with the aunt, perhaps offering financial support so that Sarah can stay with you." Richard was silent for a moment, processing the information. The idea of losing Sarah was unbearable, but he also knew he couldn't simply ignore the existence of a relative. "I need time to think," he said finally, "and I need to talk to my wife." After hanging up, Richard sat in his office, lost in thought. The situation with Sarah had become more complicated than he had ever imagined, and now, more than ever, he needed Emily by his side. As if answering his thoughts, his cell phone rang. It was Emily. "Richard," she said, her voice sounding tired, "can we talk? I think it's time for us to come home." Richard felt immense relief at hearing these words. "Of course, Emily. Actually, there's a lot we need to discuss." That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Richard and Emily sat on the porch, the night air heavy with tension and expectation. "Emily," Richard began, "first of all, I want to apologize. I should have talked to you before bringing Sarah into our home. It was selfish of me to expect you to simply accept such a big change in our lives." Emily looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "I understand why you did it, Richard. But you have to understand that this changed everything. Our life, our plans." "I know," Richard replied. "But Emily, Sarah brought something to our lives that I didn't know was missing. She gave us a chance to be a family." Emily was silent for a moment, her gaze lost in the dark garden. "I've always been afraid of being a mother," she finally confessed. "Afraid of not being good enough, of making the same mistakes my parents made with me. But seeing you with Sarah, it made me question a lot of things." Richard took Emily's hand, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. "Emily, there's something we need to discuss. The lawyer called today. They found Sarah's aunt." He explained the situation, watching the emotions pass over Emily's face. When he finished, she surprised him with her response. "Richard," Emily said, her voice firm, "I think we should adopt Sarah." Richard looked at her, astonished. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I am. These days away made me realize how much Sarah is already part of our lives, and maybe it's time for me to face my fears and open up to this new phase." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. He hugged Emily, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving us this chance." As the couple remained embraced on the porch, the moon shone over the garden where, not long ago, a small blue butterfly had flown freely. It was a symbol of transformation, of new beginnings. And for the Thompson family, it was the start of a new chapter, full of challenges but also of love and hope. The dawn brought with it a new energy to the Thompson mansion. Richard and Emily, invigorated by their decision to adopt Sarah, were determined to transform their house into a true home for the girl. However, the path ahead would not be easy. That morning, while Sarah was having breakfast with Maria in the kitchen, Richard and Emily gathered in the study to discuss the next steps. "We need to talk to the lawyer about the adoption process," said Richard, leafing through some documents on his desk. "And we also have to decide how to approach the issue of Sarah's aunt." Emily nodded, her face a mixture of determination and apprehension. "I think we should be transparent with Sarah about all of this. She has the right to know about her biological family." Richard agreed, admiring the change in Emily. His wife, who once seemed so distant from Sarah, now showed genuine concern for the girl's well-being. "You're right," he said. "But how do we do that without scaring her or making her feel like she might lose us?" Before Emily could answer, they heard a soft knock on the door. It was Sarah, her large, curious eyes observing the couple. "Can I come in?" she asked timidly. Richard and Emily exchanged a quick glance before Richard responded, "Of course, sweetheart. Actually, we have something important to talk to you about." Sarah entered, sitting in the chair between Richard and Emily. The couple looked at each other again, seeking strength from one another before beginning. "Sarah," Emily started, surprising Richard with her initiative. "Richard and I have been talking and, well, we'd like to know how you'd feel if we officially adopted you." Sarah's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief shining in them. You want to be my parents?" Richard smiled gently. "Yes, Sarah. We want you to be part of our family. Forever. But there's something else we need to tell you." Carefully, Richard explained about the aunt who had been located. He watched as Sarah's face changed expression, going from joy to confusion and then to concern. But I don't have to leave, do I?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily, in a gesture that surprised even herself, took Sarah's hand. "No, sweetie, not if you don't want to. We're willing to fight for you to stay with us. But we thought it was important for you to know about your biological family." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing everything she had heard. Finally, she looked at Richard and Emily, her eyes full of tears. "I want to stay with you. You are my family now." Richard felt his heart fill with emotion. He hugged Sarah, and to his surprise and joy, Emily joined the hug. For a moment they stayed like that, united as the family they were becoming. In the weeks that followed, life in the Thompson mansion underwent a transformation. Emily, who used to spend most of her time at social events, now dedicated hours to helping Sarah with her lessons and planning family activities. Richard, in turn, reorganized his work schedule to be more present at home. The adoption process was moving forward, but not without challenges. Sarah's aunt, although initially reluctant, agreed to talk with the Thompson family. It was decided that she would come to visit them, to meet Sarah and see how the girl was adapting to her new life. On the day of the visit, the tension was palpable in the mansion. Sarah, nervous, alternated between hiding in her room and clinging to Richard and Emily. Maria, always attentive, prepared Sarah's favorite dishes, trying to calm everyone's nerves. When the doorbell rang, Richard and Emily exchanged a look of mutual support before going to answer. At the door was a middle-aged woman, with the same brown eyes as Sarah, carrying an expression of anxiety and curiosity. "Welcome, Mrs. Johnson," Richard greeted, extending his hand. "Please, come in." Sarah's aunt, Martha Johnson, hesitantly entered the mansion, her eyes scanning the luxurious environment. "Thank you for receiving me," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know Sarah was in a place like this." Emily, surprising everyone, including herself, stepped forward. "Sarah has become a very important part of our lives," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We'd like you to see how happy and well cared for she is here." At that moment, Sarah appeared timidly at the entrance of the living room. Her eyes met her aunt's, and for an instant there was a silent recognition between them. "Hello, Sarah," Martha said softly. "Do you remember me? I'm your mother's sister." Sarah nodded slowly. I remember a little," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. What followed was an emotionally intense afternoon. Martha shared stories about Sarah's mother, bringing tears to the girl's eyes. Richard and Emily watched, their hearts tight, but determined to support Sarah in this moment of reconnection with her roots. As the afternoon progressed, it became clear to everyone that, although Martha clearly cared for Sarah, she was not in a position to offer the girl the kind of life and opportunities that the Thompsons could provide. Before leaving, Martha pulled Richard and Emily aside. "I came here prepared to fight for Sarah's custody," she confessed, "but I see now that she has found a loving home here. I can't take that away from her." Emily, with tears in her eyes, took Martha's hands. "You will always be welcome in our lives, Mrs. Johnson. Sarah deserves to know her story, her roots." Richard nodded in agreement. "We would very much like you to be part of Sarah's life if you're agreeable." Martha, emotional, agreed. "I would love that. And I will support your adoption. It's best for Sarah." When Martha left, she left behind a transformed family. Sarah, though emotionally exhausted, seemed more at peace, as if a missing piece of her internal puzzle had finally fallen into place. That night, as they put Sarah to bed, Richard and Emily found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey they had taken. From a distant, childless couple, they had transformed into a united and loving family. "You know," Emily said softly as they closed Sarah's bedroom door, "I never thought I'd be capable of loving like this, of being a mother." Richard smiled, hugging her. "You're amazing, Emily. Sarah is lucky to have you as a mother." As they walked hand in hand to their own bedroom, Richard and Emily knew there were still challenges ahead. The adoption process, the continued adaptation of their lives, the inevitable ups and downs of parenthood. But now more than ever, they were ready to face these challenges together, as a family. The months that followed Sarah's aunt's visit brought a series of changes and challenges for the Thompson family. The adoption process was moving forward, but with it came a series of evaluations, visits from social workers, and a mountain of paperwork that seemed endless. On a Saturday morning, while Sarah was playing in the garden with Maria, Richard and Emily were in the study, surrounded by piles of documents. "Another form," Emily sighed, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of frustration. "Sometimes it feels like we're trying to adopt an entire country, not just one child." Richard smiled sympathetically. "I know, dear, but each signed paper brings us closer to making Sarah officially our daughter." Emily nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. It was amazing how she had changed in recent months. The woman who once lived for social events and shopping now dedicated her time and energy to creating a welcoming home for Sarah. As they filled out more forms, they heard a commotion coming from the garden. They ran to the window and saw Sarah fallen near the swing, crying, with Maria by her side trying to calm her down. In a matter of seconds, Richard and Emily were in the garden. Sarah had a cut on her knee, nothing serious, but enough to scare the girl. "It's okay, my love," Emily said, surprising herself with the naturalness with which the words came out. She picked Sarah up in her arms, something she never imagined doing a few months ago. "Let's take care of that scratch." As Emily took Sarah inside, Richard stayed behind with Maria. "What exactly happened?" he asked, concerned. Maria sighed. "It was just an accident, Mr. Thompson. Sarah was swinging too high and lost her balance." "I should have paid more attention." Richard placed a comforting hand on Maria's shoulder. "Don't blame yourself, Maria. Accidents happen. The important thing is that Sarah is okay." Inside the house, Emily was cleaning and bandaging Sarah's knee with a gentleness she didn't know she possessed. Sarah, who was initially crying copiously, was now calmer, watching Emily with wide eyes. "There," Emily said, giving a soft kiss on the bandage. "Is it better now?" Sarah nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "Thank you, Mommy," she said, the words coming out naturally. Emily froze for a moment, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. It was the first time Sarah had called her Mommy. Tears began to form in her eyes. "You're welcome, my darling," Emily replied, her voice choked with emotion. Richard, who had quietly entered the room, observed the scene with a full heart. He approached, sitting next to Sarah and Emily. "Look at you, our little adventurer," he joked, affectionately messing up Sarah's hair. "Are you feeling better?" Sarah nodded, nestling between Richard and Emily. "Yes, Daddy. Mommy took care of me." The use of the words Mommy and Daddy didn't go unnoticed by either adult. They exchanged an emotional look over Sarah's head. That night, after putting Sarah to bed, Richard and Emily sat on the porch, reflecting on the day's events. "She called us Mommy and Daddy," Emily said, still marveling. "I never thought hearing those words would affect me so much." Richard smiled, taking Emily's hand. "It's amazing how our lives have changed, isn't it? A few months ago we were so distant from each other, and now we're a family," Emily completed. "A real family." The moment was interrupted by the ring of Richard's phone. It was the lawyer responsible for the adoption process. "Mr. Thompson," said the voice on the other end of the line, "we have news about Sarah's process." Richard put the phone on speaker so Emily could hear. "What kind of news?" "Well, things are progressing well," the lawyer continued, "but a complication has arisen. It seems there's a couple interested in adopting Sarah. They have a very favorable profile and are questioning the legality of her stay with you." Richard and Emily's hearts seemed to stop for a moment. The idea of losing Sarah was unbearable. "What can we do?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "For now, stay calm," the lawyer advised. "We'll prepare our defense. The fact that Sarah is already integrated into your family counts greatly in your favor. But we need to be prepared for a possible legal battle." After hanging up, Richard and Emily were silent for a long moment, absorbing the news. "We won't lose her," Richard finally said, his voice firm. "We'll fight with everything we have." Emily nodded, determined. "Sarah is our daughter. Nothing and no one will change that." That night, as they prepared for bed, Richard and Emily checked on Sarah one more time. The girl was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm forming on the horizon. Observing Sarah's serene face, Richard and Emily silently renewed their commitment. They had come a long way, from a distant couple to dedicated parents. Now they would face any challenge that came, united by the love they felt for their daughter. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Thompson family was ready to fight for their happy ending. The weeks following the news of the couple interested in adopting Sarah were a whirlwind of emotions and activities for the Thompson family. Richard and Emily found themselves immersed in a legal battle that would test not only their determination, but also the strength of their newly discovered love as a family. On a sunny morning, while Sarah was at school, a routine they had established to give the girl a sense of normalcy, Richard and Emily met with their lawyer, Mr. Stevens, in the Home Office. "The situation is delicate, Mr. Stevens explained, adjusting his glasses as he leafed through a stack of documents. "The interested couple, the Millers, have a very strong profile. Both have stable careers, have already gone through all the adoption evaluation processes, and don't have children." Emily felt her stomach sink. "But what about us? What about the bond we already have with Sarah?" Mr. Stevens nodded understandingly. "That's our strong point. Sarah's emotional well-being and the bond already established with you are powerful arguments, but we need to prepare for a difficult process." Richard, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "What do we need to do?" "First," the lawyer replied, "we need to reinforce how integrated Sarah is into your lives. School reports, testimonials from people close to you, evidence of her emotional progress since she arrived here. All of this will be crucial." Emily and Richard exchanged determined looks. They would do whatever was necessary. In the weeks that followed, the Thompson mansion transformed into an operations center. Friends, family, and even some of Richard's hotel employees were mobilized to provide testimonials about how Sarah had flourished under the couple's care. Maria, in particular, became an invaluable ally. Her emotional testimony about Emily's transformation from a distant socialite to a dedicated mother brought tears to the eyes of all who read it. Meanwhile, Sarah, oblivious to the legal battle unfolding, continued her life with the innocence of childhood. Richard and Emily strived to protect her from the stress of the situation, determined to keep her routine as normal as possible. One night, after putting Sarah to bed, Emily found Richard on the porch looking thoughtfully at the garden. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting next to him. Richard sighed, running his hand through his hair. "I'm thinking about how our lives have changed. A few months ago, I barely recognized the person I had become. Distant, focused only on work. And now here we are, fighting tooth and nail for our family." Emily took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I know. It's amazing how Sarah transformed us, isn't it? She made us rediscover what really matters." Richard nodded, squeezing Emily's hand. "You're right, and that's why we can't lose her. I can't imagine our life without her now." The moment was interrupted by the ring of Richard's phone. It was Mr. Stevens. "Mr. Thompson," the lawyer's voice sounded worried, "we have a problem. The Millers are requesting an emergency hearing with the judge. They claim that Sarah's prolonged stay with you is hurting their chances of establishing a bond with her." Richard felt his heart race. "And what does that mean for us?" "It means we need to act fast," Mr. Stevens replied. "The hearing is scheduled for next week. We need to be prepared to present our case convincingly." After hanging up, Richard and Emily looked at each other, the gravity of the situation weighing on them. "What will we do if we lose?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Richard pulled her into a tight embrace. "We won't lose," he said firmly. "Sarah is our daughter. We'll fight for her with everything we have." In the days leading up to the hearing, the tension in the Thompson mansion was palpable. Richard and Emily spent hours in meetings with Mr. Stevens, preparing their defense. Friends and family took turns helping with Sarah, ensuring the girl didn't notice the growing anxiety of her adoptive parents. On the eve of the hearing, Richard and Emily decided to have a delicate conversation with Sarah. They sat with her in the living room, their hearts heavy with what they needed to say. "Sarah, sweetie," Emily began gently, "tomorrow Daddy and I need to go to an important place. It's about you staying with us forever." Sarah's eyes widened with a mixture of confusion and fear. But aren't I already staying with you forever?" Richard swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "We want that very much, my love. But there are some people who think you might be happier with another family." Sarah's lower lip began to tremble. "I don't want another family. I want to stay with you." Emily pulled Sarah into a tight hug, her own tears finally falling. "We want you to stay with us too, my love. And that's why we're going to fight. I promise we'll do everything we can to keep our family together." That night, Sarah slept in Richard and Emily's bed, clinging to them as if she feared they might disappear during the night. The couple stayed awake for hours, watching their daughter's restless sleep, their hearts full of love and determination. When the sun rose the next morning, Richard and Emily got up, ready to face what could be the most important day of their lives. As they prepared to leave, they exchanged a look of mutual understanding. No matter what happened at the hearing, they would face it together, united by the love they felt for each other and for the girl who had transformed their lives. With a last kiss to Sarah, who would remain in Maria's care, Richard and Emily left for the courthouse, their hands firmly intertwined, ready to fight for their family's future. The New York City courthouse loomed against the blue morning sky, its marble columns seeming even more intimidating to Richard and Emily's eyes. The Thompson couple climbed the stairs hand in hand, each step echoing with the weight of the battle they were about to face. In the lobby, they met with Mr. Stevens, who was waiting for them with a serious but determined expression. "Are you ready?" he asked, adjusting his tie. Richard nodded, his voice firm. "More than ever." Emily squeezed Richard's hand, seeking and offering strength at the same time. "We're going to fight for our daughter." As they entered the courtroom, Richard and Emily saw the Miller couple for the first time. They were a middle-aged man and woman, well-dressed and with anxious expressions. For a brief moment, Emily felt a pang of empathy. They wanted to be parents too, after all. But then the image of Sarah's smiling face invaded her mind, and her determination was reinforced. The judge, a man with graying hair and a penetrating gaze, entered the room, and everyone stood up. "We are here today," he began, his grave voice echoing through the room, "to discuss the future of Sarah Johnson, a 7-year-old child currently under the care of Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. We also have the adoption request from Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Let's hear from the Thompsons' lawyer first." Mr. Stevens stood up, his posture confident. He began by presenting a series of documents, school reports showing Sarah's progress, testimonials from teachers, neighbors, and family friends, all attesting to how much the girl had flourished under Richard and Emily's care. "Your Honor," said Mr. Stevens, "Sarah has found not just a home with the Thompsons, but a family. She calls them Mommy and Daddy. Removing Sarah from this loving and stable environment now would be deeply traumatic for her." The Miller's lawyer counter-argued, emphasizing his client's financial stability and their long wait to adopt. Mr. and Mrs. Miller have been prepared for years to be parents. They've gone through all the necessary processes and are ready to offer a loving home to Sarah. The debate continued for hours, with both sides presenting arguments and witnesses. Maria, the Thompsons' maid, gave an emotional testimony about the transformation she had witnessed in the family. "I saw this house go from a cold, lifeless place to a home full of love and laughter," she said, tears in her eyes. "Sarah brought light to Mr. Richard and Mrs. Emily's lives, and they, in turn, gave her the love and security she so desperately needed." Finally, the moment Richard and Emily feared most arrived. The judge requested to speak with Sarah privately. While they waited outside the room, the couple embraced, their minds full of worry. "What if she gets scared?" Emily whispered. "What if she doesn't know what to say?" Richard gently kissed Emily's forehead. "Sarah is stronger than we think. She knows what she wants. We have to trust her." Inside the room, the judge spoke gently with Sarah. "Sarah," he began, his voice soft, "can you tell me what it's like living with Mr. Richard and Mrs. Emily?" Sarah, sitting in a chair too big for her, nervously swung her feet. "They're my parents," she said simply. "They love me, and I love them." "And do you know there's another couple who would like to be your parents too?" the judge asked carefully. Sarah nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "But I already have parents. Please don't take me away from them. They're my family." The judge observed the girl for a long moment, touched by the sincerity in her voice. When everyone was called back into the room, the tension was palpable. Richard and Emily sat down, their hands tightly clasped, hearts beating fast. The judge cleared his throat, looking at everyone present before speaking. "This is a complex case," he began. "On one side, we have a couple who has followed all the legal adoption procedures, and on the other, a couple who, although they came to this situation in an unconventional manner, has clearly established a deep bond with the child in question." He paused. The silence in the room was deafening. "After considering all testimonies, documents, and most importantly, Sarah's own opinion, I come to the following decision. It is in the child's best interest to remain with the Thompson family." Richard and Emily let out the breath they didn't know they were holding. Tears of relief and joy ran freely down their faces as they embraced. The judge continued. "The Thompsons have permission to proceed with the formal adoption process of Sarah. However," he turned to the Millers, who looked devastated, "I would like to suggest that an open channel of communication be maintained. Sarah has the right to know all those who care about her." As they left the courthouse, victorious but emotionally exhausted, Richard and Emily saw the Millers approaching. For a tense moment, the two couples stared at each other. Then, to everyone's surprise, Mrs. Miller spoke, her voice choked. "Take good care of her. She deserves all the love in the world." Emily, moved by a compassion she didn't expect to feel, responded softly, "Thank you. And if you'd like, maybe you could be part of her life somehow, as family friends." The Millers nodded, a small smile of gratitude on their faces. As they left the courthouse, Richard and Emily felt reborn. They had faced their greatest challenge and emerged victorious, not only keeping Sarah but also growing as people and as a couple. "Let's go home," Richard said, smiling at Emily. "Our daughter is waiting." And so, hand in hand, they walked towards the future, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together as the family they had become. The sun was already setting when Richard and Emily finally arrived home after the long and emotionally exhausting day in court. As they opened the door to the mansion, they were greeted by an anxious silence. "Sarah?" Emily called, her voice trembling slightly with anticipation. Suddenly they heard hurried footsteps coming down the stairs, and in seconds Sarah appeared, her eyes wide with hope and fear. "Mommy? Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Richard knelt down, opening his arms. "Come here, princess." Sarah ran into Richard's arms, who hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face. Emily joined the hug, enveloping her newly official family. "It's all okay now, my love," Emily whispered, stroking Sarah's hair. "We won. You're going to stay with us forever." Sarah sobbed with relief, clinging to her parents with all the strength her small body could muster. "I knew it," she said between sobs. "I knew you wouldn't let me go." Maria, who was watching the scene from the kitchen doorway, couldn't contain her own tears. She approached timidly, not wanting to interrupt the family moment. Richard noticed her presence and extended an arm, including her in the hug. "Thank you, Maria," he said sincerely. "We couldn't have done it without you." The rest of the evening was a quiet celebration. The Thompson family, now officially complete, dined together in the living room, something they had never done before. Laughter and lively conversations filled the environment, so different from the tense atmosphere that had dominated the house in recent weeks. Later, as they put Sarah to bed, the girl asked a question that caught Richard and Emily by surprise. "Can I call you Mum and Dad for real now?" she asked, her eyes shining with hope. Emily felt her heart melt. "Oh, sweetie," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You always could. We are your parents in heart and now on paper too." Richard nodded, holding Sarah's hand. "It's true, Princess. And you are our daughter, in every way that matters." Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that lights up the whole face. "I love you, Mum and Dad," she said, testing out the words. "We love you too, more than you can imagine," Richard replied, kissing Sarah's forehead. After Sarah fell asleep, Richard and Emily retreated to the porch, as they had done so many nights since Sarah had entered their lives. But this time the air was light, full of possibilities. "It's amazing how our lives have changed," Emily reflected, looking at the stars. Richard hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "For the better, no doubt. Do you regret anything?" Emily turned in his arms, looking into her husband's eyes. "Not for a second. Sarah saved us, Richard. She saved our marriage, made us rediscover what really matters in life." Richard smiled, agreeing. "She taught us to love again, to be a family." As the couple remained embraced under the starry sky, both reflected on the incredible journey they had taken. From a couple on the brink of divorce, focused only on their careers and social lives, they had transformed into dedicated and loving parents. In the days that followed, the Thompson family began to adjust to their new reality. Richard reorganized his work schedule to be more present at home, delegating more responsibilities in his hotels. Emily, in turn, channeled her energy and social skills into charitable causes focused on underprivileged children, inspired by her own experience with Sarah. One afternoon, as Sarah was doing her homework at the kitchen table, Emily received an unexpected call. It was Mrs. Miller. "Mrs. Thompson," she began hesitantly, "I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to know how Sarah is doing." Emily felt a wave of compassion. "She's doing very well, Mrs. Miller. In fact," she hesitated for a moment before continuing, "if you and your husband would like, maybe you could come visit us someday. As family friends, as we suggested in court." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then, "We would love that. Thank you for your generosity." After hanging up, Emily joined Sarah at the kitchen table. "Sweetie, what do you think about having some special guests for lunch next weekend?" Sarah looked curiously at her mother. "Who?" "Remember the couple we met in court? They would like to get to know you better. Not as parents, but as friends. What do you think?" Sarah thought for a moment, then smiled. "I think that would be nice. Can I show them the butterfly garden we made?" Emily felt her heart swell with pride at her daughter's maturity and compassion. "Of course you can, my love. I'm sure they'll love it." That night, as the Thompson family gathered for dinner, there was a palpable feeling of peace and contentment in the air. They had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and in the process had transformed into something stronger and more beautiful than they ever imagined possible. Richard raised his glass, looking lovingly at his wife and daughter. "Our toast," he said, "to our family, to the love that brought us together and the journey we still have ahead." Emily and Sarah raised their glasses, Sarah with her grape juice, bright smiles on their faces. "To family," they echoed in unison. And so, under the roof of the mansion that was once cold and empty, the Thompson family celebrated not only their happy present, but also the bright future they had ahead, a future full of love, understanding, and above all the joy of being together, united by the strongest bond of all, that of a family chosen by the heart. The months that followed brought a series of changes and challenges for the Thompson family, each one faced with the love and unity that had become the hallmark of their home. On a sunny Saturday morning, the Thompson mansion was in a flurry of activity. Sarah, now 8 years old, was running back and forth, helping Maria set the garden table for a special lunch. Richard was at the grill, preparing what promised to be a feast, while Emily put the final touches on the decorations. "Mom?" Sarah called, holding a vase of flowers. "Where should I put this?" Emily smiled, admiring her daughter's enthusiasm. "How about in the center of the table, sweetie? It'll look beautiful there." The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house and everyone froze for a moment. Sarah looked anxiously at her parents. "Is it them?" she asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Richard nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "It must be. Shall we greet them together?" The Thompson family gathered at the front door, took a deep breath and opened it with a warm smile. On the other side were the Millers, carrying a cake and a bouquet of flowers. "Welcome," said Emily, her voice genuinely welcoming. "Please come in." The Millers entered timidly, their eyes immediately finding Sarah. For a moment, there was an emotionally charged silence. It was Sarah who broke the ice. Taking a step forward, she smiled and said, "Hello. Would you like to see my butterfly garden?" Mrs. Miller's face lit up. "We'd love to, dear." The lunch proceeded in a surprisingly pleasant atmosphere. The local orphanage children, whom the Millers had started visiting regularly, became an animated topic of conversation. Sarah listened with fascination to the stories about her new friends. "You know, Mr. Miller said, looking fondly at Sarah, "even though we didn't become your parents, we're happy to have the chance to be part of your life in some way." Emily, touched by the sincerity in his words, replied, "And we're grateful for your understanding and generosity. Sarah is lucky to have so many people who care about her." As the children played in the garden after lunch, the adults chatted on the porch, watching them with smiles on their faces. "Have you thought about having more children?" Mrs. Miller asked hesitantly. Richard and Emily exchanged a meaningful look before Richard answered, "Actually, we're considering adopting again. Maybe a brother or sister for Sarah." The Miller's eyes widened with surprise and admiration. "That's wonderful!" exclaimed Mr. Miller. "If you need any help or advice during the process, we'd be happy to help." The offer deeply touched Richard and Emily. It was a testament to how circumstances that could have made them adversaries had actually created an unexpected friendship. Later that night, after the Millers had left and Sarah was in bed, Richard and Emily found themselves in their usual spot on the porch. The starry sky seemed even brighter, as if reflecting the joy in their hearts. "You know," said Emily, leaning back against Richard, "when I think about how our life has changed since that day at the dealership, it seems almost like a miracle." Richard nodded, hugging her tighter. "It's true. And to think we almost lost all of this. But we didn't," Emily completed. "And now we have the chance to make a difference, not only in our children's lives, but in so many others through the foundation." As they watched the stars, Richard and Emily silently renewed their own vows, not just to their children, but to all the children they could help through their work. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of material wealth, was now a beacon of hope and love. And as the night progressed, the family slept peacefully, united by bonds stronger than blood, the bonds of chosen love, of family created with the heart. Autumn had arrived in New York City, painting the trees with shades of red and gold when the Thompson family prepared for a big change. The day had finally come. They were going to pick up Lucas, the 5-year-old boy they were about to adopt. On the morning of Lucas's arrival, the Thompson mansion was in a flurry of activity. Sarah, now 9 years old, ran back and forth, helping Maria arrange the room that would be her new brother's. "Mom," Sarah called from the top of the stairs, "do you think Lucas will like the dinosaurs I put on the shelf?" Emily smiled, climbing the stairs to see her daughter's work. "I'm sure he'll love them, sweetie. You're being a wonderful big sister." Richard appeared in the hallway carrying a small suitcase. "It's time," he said, his voice a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Let's go get our boy." The trip to the shelter where Lucas was staying was silent, each member of the Thompson family lost in their own thoughts and expectations. Sarah held Emily's hand firmly, her eyes shining with anticipation. When they arrived, they were greeted by a social worker with a gentle smile. "The final paperwork is ready," she said. "Lucas is waiting for you." The moment they first saw Lucas was forever etched in the family's memory. The boy, small for his age, with dark hair and large, curious eyes, was sitting in a chair, nervously swinging his legs that barely touched the floor. Richard knelt in front of him, smiling warmly. "Hello, Lucas. I'm Richard, this is Emily, and this is Sarah. We've come to take you home." Lucas looked at each of them, his eyes lingering on Sarah. "Are you going to be my sister?" he asked shyly. Sarah stepped forward, extending her hand. "Yes, I'm your big sister. Want to see a picture of your new room? It has dinosaurs." Lucas's face lit up with a smile, the first they had seen. "I love dinosaurs." The trip back home was marked by animated conversations, with Lucas asking questions about everything from the car they were in to the name of the neighbor's dog, which Sarah promptly informed was named Rex. When they arrived at the mansion, Maria was waiting for them at the door, her face radiant with happiness. "Welcome to your new home, Lucas," she said warmly. Lucas looked in wonder at the large house, his eyes wide with amazement. "I'm going to live here?" he asked, incredulous. "Yes, my love," Emily replied, taking his hand. "This is your home now. Would you like to see your room?" The weeks that followed were full of adjustments and discoveries. Lucas, although initially shy, soon began to open up, revealing a curious and affectionate personality. Sarah took her role as big sister seriously, always ready to help and play with Lucas. One night, about a month after Lucas's arrival, Richard found Emily on the porch, watching the children play in the garden. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, hugging her from behind. Emily sighed contentedly, leaning back against him. "I'm thinking about how our life has changed." "How blessed we are." Richard nodded, watching Sarah teach Lucas how to plant a flower in the butterfly garden. Who would have thought that day at the dealership would change everything? "It's amazing, isn't it?" Emily reflected. "How one small moment can completely alter the course of our lives." At that moment, Lucas ran up to them, holding a slightly crushed flower. "Look, Mommy." "So I planted this." Emily knelt down, hugging the boy. "It's beautiful, my love. Let's put it in a special vase, shall we?" As Emily took Lucas inside, Richard stayed watching Sarah, who was now carefully watering the new seedlings. She looked up, meeting her father's gaze, and smiled, a smile full of love and confidence that warmed Richard's heart. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Richard and Emily gathered in the study to discuss some pending matters. "I received an interesting proposal today," Richard began, showing Emily some papers. "An NGO that works with children in vulnerable situations wants to partner with our hotel chain. They propose a training and employment program for young people who are leaving the foster care system." Emily's eyes sparkled with interest. "That's wonderful, Richard. We could make a real difference in these children's lives." Richard nodded, smiling. "I thought the same thing. And there's more. They suggested that you could lead the program's supervisory committee, given your recent experience with adoption and your work with children's support organizations." Emily was silent for a moment, moved by the idea. I would love that. It would be a way to give back, to use our experience to help other families and children." As they discussed the details of the project, both felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their lives, which had once been focused only on professional success and social status, were now dedicated to making a difference in the world, inspired by their own children. The next day during breakfast, Richard and Emily shared the news with Sarah and Lucas. "Does this mean you're going to help other children like us?" Sarah asked, her eyes shining with pride. Lucas, still chewing his cereal, added, "Can I help too?" Richard laughed, affectionately messing up his son's hair. "Of course you can, champ. In fact, we'd like both of you to help us think of ideas for the project. What do you think other children like you would like or need?" Breakfast turned into an animated brainstorming session, with Sarah and Lucas offering suggestions that ranged from practical to imaginative. Emily wrote everything down, impressed by her children's empathy and creativity. As he watched his family engaged in this discussion, Richard felt a wave of gratitude and love so intense it almost took his breath away. From a man focused only on business, he had transformed into a dedicated father and an agent of change in his community. The Thompson Mansion, once a symbol of wealth and status, now pulsed with life, love, and purpose. The walls that once echoed with silence now resonated with laughter, ideas, and plans for a better future. Not just for their family, but for many other children and families they hoped to help. And so the Thompson family embarked on yet another chapter of their journey, united by love, strengthened by the adversities they had overcome, and inspired by the opportunity to make a difference in the world, one heart at a time. Time passed quickly for the Thompson family. Sarah, now 11 years old, and Lucas, 7, had adapted perfectly to family life. The mansion, once silent and cold, was now always full of laughter, lively conversations, and occasionally typical sibling squabbles. On a sunny Saturday morning, Richard watched from the terrace as Sarah taught Lucas how to ride a bicycle in the garden. Emily joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "They grow up so fast," Richard commented, smiling as he saw Lucas finally manage to pedal on his own, with Sarah running alongside, applauding. Emily nodded, leaning against her husband. "It's true. It seems like yesterday that we first brought Sarah home." The moment was interrupted by the ring of Richard's cell phone. It was from the central office of his hotel chain. "Richard," said his assistant's anxious voice, "we have a problem. The hotel under construction in Florida is facing protests from the local community. They claim the project is causing environmental damage." Richard frowned, concerned. "I understand. Schedule a video conference with the local team for an hour from now. We need to understand exactly what's happening." After hanging up, he turned to Emily, who was looking at him with concern. "Problems?" she asked. Richard sighed. "Yes, but nothing we can't resolve. I just hope it doesn't affect our plans for today." The plans in question were a visit to a local shelter, part of the new partnership project between the hotel chain and the NGO. The whole family was involved, with Sarah and Lucas especially excited to meet other children and help. Fortunately, Richard managed to resolve the hotel situation in time. Apparently, there had been a misunderstanding about the project's environmental impact, and he promptly ordered a complete review of the construction plans, promising full transparency with the local community. In the afternoon, the Thompson family arrived at the shelter loaded with supplies and toys. The place was simple but welcoming, with colorful walls decorated with children's drawings. Sarah and Lucas, initially shy, soon mingled with the other children. Richard and Emily watched with pride as their children organized games and activities, making sure all the children felt included. At one point, Richard noticed a boy sitting alone in a corner, watching the other children play. He gently approached him. "Hi," said Richard, crouching down to the boy's level. "I'm Richard. What's your name?" "Michael," the boy replied timidly. "Why aren't you playing with the others, Michael?" Michael shrugged, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I don't know if they'll like me. I have trouble speaking sometimes." Richard felt his heart tighten. "You know something, Michael. I'm sure they'd love to play with you. How about we go there together? I can introduce you to my children, Sarah and Lucas." With a little encouragement, Michael finally joined the other children. To Richard's surprise and joy, Sarah and Lucas immediately welcomed him, making sure to include him in all activities. On the way back home, the car was full of animated conversations about the day. Sarah and Lucas couldn't stop talking about the new friends they had made, especially Michael. "Dad, Mum," Sarah suddenly said, her voice serious, "can we visit the shelter more often?" "I want to help more," Lucas enthusiastically agreed. "Yes, and can we bring more toys next time?" Richard and Emily exchanged emotional looks. "Of course we can," Emily replied. "In fact, we were thinking about making these visits a regular thing. What do you think?" The children cheered, already making plans for the next visit. That night, after putting the children to bed, Richard and Emily found themselves on the porch, their usual place for reflections. "I'm so proud of them," said Emily, referring to Sarah and Lucas. "The way they welcomed those children, especially Michael. It's amazing to see how much they've grown." Richard agreed, pulling Emily close. "They are incredible. And you know something? I think we found our true calling with this project." Emily looked at him, curious. "What do you mean?" "Well," Richard began, "I've been thinking, what if we expanded this program, not just in our hotels, but create a foundation dedicated to helping children in vulnerable situations? We could offer educational programs, professional training, psychological support." Emily's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Richard, that's wonderful. We could make a real difference in so many children's lives." As they discussed the details of their new vision, both felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their lives, which had once been focused on accumulating wealth and status, were now dedicated to creating a positive impact in the world. The Thompson mansion, which had once been a symbol of ostentation, was now becoming the center of a movement of change and hope. The walls that once echoed with silence now resonated with plans for a better future, not just for Sarah and Lucas, but for countless other children who needed a chance. And so, as night fell over New York City, the Thompson family prepared for another chapter in their journey. A chapter full of challenges, no doubt, but also filled with love, compassion, and the promise of a brighter future for many. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity for the Thompson family. The idea of creating a foundation to help children in vulnerable situations quickly took shape, with Richard and Emily diving headfirst into the project. On a Thursday afternoon, the Thompson mansion's dining room had been transformed into an impromptu office. Richard, Emily, and a team of lawyers and consultants were gathered around the table, discussing the legal and logistical details of the new foundation. "So it's decided," said Richard, looking at the papers in front of him. "The Thompson Foundation for Children's Future will be officially launched next month." Emily nodded, a radiant smile on her face. "I can't wait for us to start. We already have so many ideas and projects planned." At that moment, Sarah and Lucas entered the room, returning from school. Their eyes widened at seeing so many people gathered. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, curious. Richard motioned for the children to come closer. "Come here, we have exciting news to share with you." As they explained about the foundation, Sarah and Lucas's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Does this mean we'll be able to help more children like Michael?" Lucas asked, remembering the shy boy they had met at the shelter. Emily smiled, hugging her son. "Exactly, dear. We'll be able to help many children like Michael." Sarah, always thoughtful, frowned for a moment. "But Dad, what about your hotels? Won't you work in them anymore?" Richard was impressed by his daughter's insight. "Well, Sarah, I'll continue overseeing the hotels, but I'll dedicate much more time to the foundation. In fact," he paused, exchanging a look with Emily, "we were thinking of inviting you two to be part of the foundation's youth council. What do you think?" The children were ecstatic with the idea. They immediately began suggesting ideas for projects and activities, their energy infecting everyone in the room. In the weeks leading up to the foundation's official launch, the Thompson mansion was in constant bustle. Richard and Emily worked tirelessly, but always made sure to reserve time for family. One night, as they were having dinner together, a tradition they had firmly established, Lucas asked a question that caught everyone by surprise. "Mom, Dad," he began, hesitant, "do you think that we could invite Michael to spend a weekend here?" Richard and Emily exchanged surprised looks but smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Lucas," Emily replied. "We'll get in touch with the shelter and see if it's possible." Sarah, excited by her brother's idea, added, "We can show him the butterfly garden, and maybe we can have a picnic." The weekend with Michael was a success. The shy boy they had met at the shelter blossomed in the warm company of the Thompson family. Seeing the smile on Michael's face as he played with Sarah and Lucas in the garden reinforced for Richard and Emily the importance of the work they were about to start with the foundation. Finally, the day of the official launch of the Thompson Foundation for Children's Future arrived. The event was held at one of Richard's hotels, with the presence of important personalities, partners, and most importantly, representatives from various childcare institutions. Richard, wearing an elegant suit, took the stage to give the opening speech. Emily, Sarah, and Lucas were in the front row, their faces radiant with pride. "A few years ago," Richard began, his voice laden with emotion, "I was a different man, focused only on business, on accumulating wealth and status. But then, by a stroke of fate, a little girl entered our lives and changed everything." He paused, looking fondly at Sarah. "That girl taught us the true meaning of family, of unconditional love. And through her, we discovered our true vocation. The Thompson Foundation for Children's Future is born from that love, from that understanding that every child deserves a chance, a home, a family." As Richard continued his speech, detailing the foundation's goals and projects, Emily noticed tears in Sarah and Lucas's eyes. She hugged them, feeling her own heart overflow with emotion. After the event, as the family prepared to go home, they were approached by an elderly lady. It was Mrs. Clarisse, director of one of the shelters that would be benefited by the foundation. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice choked. "I have no words to express my gratitude. What you're doing, it's going to change so many children's lives." Richard and Emily, moved, thanked Mrs. Clarice. Sarah and Lucas, observing the scene, felt inspired and proud of their parents. That night, back at the mansion, the Thompson family gathered on the porch, their special place for reflection. The starry New York City sky shone above them, as if blessing the new chapter of their lives. "You know," said Emily, looking at Richard, Sarah, and Lucas, "when I think about how our lives have changed, it almost seems like a fairy tale." Richard smiled, taking Emily's hand. "But it's real. And the best part is that now we can help create happy endings for other children." Sarah and Lucas, nestled between their parents, smiled sleepily. The day had been long and exciting, but their hearts were full of joy and purpose. As the Thompson family watched the stars, each of them reflected on the amazing journey that had brought them here. From a couple on the brink of divorce to a united family dedicated to making a difference in the world, they had come a long way. The mansion that was once a symbol of empty wealth now pulsed with love, compassion, and the commitment to create a better future for needy children. And as the night progressed, the Thompson family knew that this was just the beginning of a new and exciting adventure. An adventure they would share together, united by love and the desire to make the world a better place, one child at a time. The first year of the Thompson Foundation for Children's Future was marked by successes and challenges. Richard and Emily found themselves dividing their time between managing the hotels, working at the foundation, and of course their family. Sarah, now 12, and Lucas, 8, were increasingly involved in the foundation's projects, bringing a unique and valuable perspective. One Friday afternoon, while Richard was in a video conference in his home office, Emily received a worrying call from Mrs. Clarice, the director of the shelter they had met at the foundation's launch. "Mrs. Thompson," Mrs. Clarice's voice sounded anxious, "we're facing a difficult situation. We've received a group of siblings, 3 children, who were removed from a high-risk situation. The problem is that we don't have enough space to keep them together, and the idea of separating them is devastating." Emily felt her heart tighten. "I understand, Mrs. Clarice. What's the age of these children?" "The oldest is 10, the middle one is 7, and the youngest is only 4, Mrs. Clarice replied. "They've been through so much already. I can't bear the thought of separating them now." "Don't worry," Emily said, her mind already working on possible solutions. "I'll talk to Richard and see what we can do. I promise we'll get back to you today." After hanging up, Emily went straight to Richard's office, interrupting his video conference. Seeing the worried expression on his wife's face, Richard asked for a pause in the meeting. "What happened?" he asked, standing up to hug her. Emily quickly explained the situation. Richard listened attentively, his expression becoming more serious with each word. "We have to help," he said without hesitation. "But how?" At that moment, Sarah and Lucas, who had overheard part of the conversation, entered the office. "What if they stayed here?" Sarah suggested, her eyes shining with the idea. "We have so much space," Lucas enthusiastically agreed. "Yes, we can share our toys and show them the butterfly garden." Richard and Emily exchanged surprised looks, but couldn't help smiling at their children's enthusiasm and compassion. "It's not that simple, darlings," Emily gently explained. "There are many rules and legal procedures involved. But," Richard added, seeing the disappointment on the children's faces, "I think we can find a temporary solution while we work out the legal details." In the hours that followed, the Thompson family sprang into action. Richard made calls to his lawyers and contacts in social services, while Emily coordinated with Mrs. Clarice and prepared the logistics to receive the children. Sarah and Lucas, determined to help, began arranging guest rooms, selecting toys and books to share with the new visitors. Finally, after a series of negotiations and emergency arrangements, an agreement was reached. The 3 siblings, Anna, Peter, and Timothy, would temporarily stay at the Thompson mansion under the official supervision of social services, while a permanent solution was worked out. The next morning, a social services car arrived bringing the 3 children. Anna, the oldest, firmly held the hands of her younger siblings, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and hope. Richard and Emily came out to receive them, with Sarah and Lucas right behind, eager to meet their new temporary friends. "Welcome," Emily said softly, kneeling to be at the children's height. "We hope you feel at home here." Anna, clearly protective of her siblings, looked cautiously at the Thompsons. "Will we stay together?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, dear," Richard assured, his heart aching at the evident concern in the girl's voice. "You'll stay together here with us." Sarah stepped forward, smiling gently. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and this is my brother Lucas. Do you want to see the butterfly garden?" The mention of butterflies seemed to spark the interest of little Timothy, who looked hopefully at his older sister. Anna, seeing the genuine kindness in Sarah's eyes, slowly nodded. As the children were guided by Sarah and Lucas to the garden, Richard and Emily watched, their hearts full of a mixture of emotions. "It won't be easy," Emily said softly. Richard nodded, hugging her. "No, it won't. But we'll do whatever it takes to help these children." In the days that followed, the Thompson mansion adapted to the presence of its new temporary residents. Anna, Peter, and Timothy, initially shy and reserved, gradually began to open up, especially with the patience and affection shown by Sarah and Lucas. One night, while the children were sleeping, Richard and Emily found themselves in their usual spot on the porch. "You know," Richard said thoughtfully, "when we started the foundation, I never imagined we'd be directly involved in this way." Emily smiled, leaning against him. "It's true, but seeing the progress of these children even in such a short time, it makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it?" Richard nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "Definitely, and it makes me think, maybe we can do more. Not just for Anna, Peter, and Timothy, but for other children in similar situations." As they discussed possibilities and dreamed of ways to expand their impact, Richard and Emily knew they were embarking on a new chapter in their lives. A chapter that would bring challenges, no doubt, but also the opportunity to make a real difference in the world, one child at a time. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of wealth and status, was now becoming a beacon of hope and love for needy children. And as the night progressed, the Thompson family, now temporarily expanded, rested, ready to face the challenges and joys that the new day would bring. The weeks turned into months, and the presence of Anna, Peter, and Timothy in the Thompson mansion went from being a temporary situation to becoming an integral part of the family's life. What was initially meant to be a short-term arrangement had extended, with the approval and constant supervision of social services. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, the mansion's garden was full of laughter and activity. Richard watched with a smile on his face as Lucas and Peter, now inseparable, built an elaborate toy car track using twigs and leaves. Sarah and Anna were sitting in the shade of a tree, absorbed in a conversation that seemed extremely serious for girls their age. Little Timothy ran back and forth, chasing butterflies and laughing joyfully. Emily joined Richard, handing him a cup of coffee. "It's amazing how they've adapted, isn't it?" she commented, her eyes shining with emotion. Richard nodded, pulling Emily close. "It's true. It's as if they've always been part of our lives." At that moment, Timothy tripped and fell, letting out a small cry of fright. Before Richard or Emily could react, Sarah was already by his side, helping him up and checking if he was hurt. "It's okay, Timothy," Sarah said gently, wiping a tear from the boy's face. "See, it didn't even scratch. Do you want me to teach you how to make a flower crown?" Timothy's little face lit up immediately, all pain forgotten. "Yes, please!" Richard and Emily exchanged emotional looks. The maturity and care that Sarah demonstrated were touching. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Richard and Emily gathered in the study for a serious conversation. "I received a call from social services today," Richard began, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "They're considering long-term options for Anna, Peter, and Timothy." Emily felt her heart tighten. "And what does that mean exactly?" Richard took a deep breath. "Well, there are two main possibilities. They can be put up for adoption, which would probably mean separating them, or, Emily pressed, feeling she knew where this was going. "Or we could consider officially adopting them," Richard concluded, his eyes fixed on Emily's. A heavy silence fell over the study. The idea wasn't entirely unexpected. Both had thought about it, even if they hadn't verbalized it. "Richard," Emily began slowly, "do you think we're ready for this? Going from 2 to 5 children is quite a change." Richard took Emily's hands in his. I know it's a huge decision, but think about how our lives changed since Sarah came into it. And then Lucas. Every time we opened our hearts, our capacity to love only grew. Emily nodded, tears forming in her eyes. You're right. And the idea of separating them, I can't bear to think about it. So, Richard said softly, I think we know what we have to do, but we need to talk to Sarah and Lucas first. This decision affects the whole family. The next morning, Richard and Emily gathered Sarah and Lucas for a special family council. They carefully explained the situation, closely watching their children's reactions. Sarah was the first to speak, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. You mean Anna, Peter, and Timothy would be our real siblings? Forever? Lucas, though quieter, had a wide smile on his face. That would be amazing. Peter and I are already like brothers anyway. Richard and Emily looked at each other, moved by their children's positive reaction. Yes, that's what we're considering, Emily said gently. But it's a very big decision. Are you sure you're okay with this? Sarah stood up, hugging her parents. Mum, Dad, you taught us that family is about love, not blood. Anna, Peter, and Timothy are already part of our family in our hearts. Now we just need to make it official. Sarah's words deeply touched Richard and Emily. At that moment, they knew they were making the right decision. In the days that followed, the Thompson family embarked on the official adoption process. There were countless meetings with social workers, psychological evaluations, and mountains of paperwork. But through it all, the family's love and determination remained unshakable. Finally, the day came to tell Anna, Peter, and Timothy. Richard and Emily gathered all the children in the living room, their hearts beating fast. Anna, Peter, Timothy, Richard began gently, we have something very important to ask you. The three children looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Emily continued, her voice soft and full of emotion. We would love for you to become an official part of our family. We'd like to adopt you if you want. For a moment there was a stunned silence. Then Anna, always the protector, spoke with a trembling voice. All of us? Together? Yes, dear, Richard assured. All of you together. Tears began to fall freely. Timothy was the first to move, running into Emily's arms. Peter looked at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly before joining the hug. Anna, always more cautious, looked at Sarah. Does this mean we'll be real sisters? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled, extending her hand. We're already sisters in our hearts. Now it will be official in every way. With that, Anna finally allowed herself to smile, joining the family hug. That night, the Thompson mansion was filled with a vibrant energy of love and hope. As the children slept, exhausted but happy, Richard and Emily found themselves in their usual spot on the porch. Did you imagine our family would grow like this when we first brought Sarah home? Emily asked, leaning back against Richard. He laughed softly, hugging her. Not even in my wildest dreams. But I wouldn't change a thing. As they watched the stars, Richard and Emily knew they had a long road ahead. There would be challenges, no doubt, but also much joy, love, and growth. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of material wealth, was now truly rich in love and compassion. And so the Thompson family, now with 7 members, prepared for the next chapter of their journey, united by love and the certainty that, together, they could overcome any obstacle. The months following the decision to adopt Anna, Peter, and Timothy were filled with changes and adjustments for the Thompson family. The mansion, once spacious, now seemed to vibrate with new and constant energy, echoing with laughter, occasional arguments, and the sound of hurried footsteps through the corridors. One Saturday morning, Richard woke up early, as usual, and went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. To his surprise, he found Anna already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with an open notebook in front of her. "Good morning, Anna," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You're up early today." Anna looked up, a small smile forming on her face. "Good morning to Richard," she corrected quickly, blushing slightly. Richard felt his heart tighten at her hesitation. He sat down next to Anna, looking curiously at the notebook. "What are you doing?" Anna hesitated for a moment before answering. I'm making a list of rules." "Rules?" Richard asked, intrigued. Anna nodded, her eyes fixed on the notebook. "Yes, rules for being a good daughter. So that you'll want to keep us." Richard felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Gently, he placed his hand over Anna's. "Oh dear," he said softly, "you don't need rules to be a good daughter, and we're not going to keep you. You're part of our family now, forever." Anna looked at him, her eyes full of a mixture of hope and fear. "Even if I make mistakes?" Richard smiled, pulling her into a hug. "Especially if you make mistakes. Family is about unconditional love, Anna. We love you, Peter, and Timothy exactly as you are." At that moment, Emily entered the kitchen, closely followed by Timothy, who was still in his pajamas and carrying his favorite teddy bear. "What's going on here?" Emily asked, smiling as she saw Richard and Anna hugging. "We're having a conversation about family," Richard replied, winking at Anna. The rest of the morning was filled with the organized chaos that had become typical of Saturday breakfasts in the Thompson house. Sarah and Lucas soon joined them, followed by a still sleepy Peter. As the children ate and chatted animatedly, Richard and Emily exchanged looks of mutual understanding. They knew there was still a long way to go, especially in terms of helping Anna, Peter, and Timothy feel truly secure and at home. Later that day, the family decided to have a picnic in the garden. As they arranged the blanket and food, Sarah approached Emily with an idea. "Mum," she began, her voice full of enthusiasm, "I was thinking, what if we had a ceremony?" Emily looked at her, curious. "What kind of ceremony, dear?" "A family ceremony," Sarah explained, "to officially celebrate Anna, Peter, and Timothy joining us. We could make vows, like in a wedding, but for family." The idea quickly gained enthusiastic support from everyone. In the days that followed, each family member worked secretly on their vows, with Richard and Emily helping the younger ones. On the day of the ceremony, the garden was decorated with flowers and colorful ribbons. Maria, who had become an even more integral part of the family since the arrival of the new children, had prepared a special cake for the occasion. One by one, each member of the Thompson family stood up to make their vows. Richard began, "Anna, Peter, Timothy, I promise to be not just a father, but a friend. I promise to listen, support, and love you unconditionally every day of our lives." Emily followed. "I promise to create a home full of love, understanding, and acceptance. I promise to be a safe harbor in difficult times and a cheerleader in moments of joy." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, said, "I promise to be the best big sister I can be. I promise to protect you, play with you, and always be by your side." Lucas, in his childish simplicity, promised, "I'll share my toys and never leave you alone in the dark." When it came time for Anna, Peter, and Timothy, there was a moment of hesitation. Anna, always the spokesperson for the siblings, finally stood up. "We promise," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "to try. Try to trust, try to love, try to be part of this family. And we thank you for giving us a home and a family." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden when Anna finished. Richard and Emily hugged the children, their tears mingling in a celebration of love and unity. As they cut the cake and toasted with juice, the Thompson family knew that this was more than just a simple picnic. It was the official beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter full of promises, challenges, and above all, love. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Richard and Emily found themselves in their usual spot on the porch. The starry sky seemed even brighter, as if reflecting the joy in their hearts. "You know," Emily said, leaning back against Richard, "when I think about how our life changed since that day at the dealership, it almost seems like a miracle." Richard nodded, hugging her tighter. "It's true. And to think we almost lost all of this. But we didn't," Emily completed. "And now we have the chance to make a difference not only in our children's lives, but in so many others through the foundation." As they watched the stars, Richard and Emily silently renewed their own vows, not just for their children, but for all the children they could help through their work. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of material wealth, was now a beacon of hope and love. And as the night progressed, the family slept peacefully, united by bonds stronger than blood, the bonds of chosen love, of family created with the heart. The months turned into years, and the Thompson family continued to grow and evolve. Sarah, now 15, was becoming a conscious young woman passionate about social causes. Lucas, at 11, showed a surprising talent for technology. Anna, at 13, had become a dedicated student, while Peter, at 10, showed a natural aptitude for sports. Little Timothy, now 7, charmed everyone with his insatiable curiosity and generous heart. One Sunday afternoon, the family was gathered in the living room. Richard and Emily had called a family meeting to discuss an important matter. "Children," Richard began, his face serious but his eyes shining with enthusiasm, "your mother and I have a proposal for you." All the children straightened up, curious. Emily continued, "As you know, our foundation has grown a lot in recent years. We're helping more children than we ever imagined possible. But we want to do more," Richard added. "And for that we need your help." Sarah, always the most perceptive, leaned forward. "What kind of help, Dad?" Richard smiled, proud of his eldest daughter's interest. "We're thinking of expanding our temporary foster care program. We want to open our home to more children who need a temporary home while we look for permanent solutions for them." There was a moment of silence as the children processed the information. It was Anna who spoke first, her voice calm but firm. "Like it was with us at the beginning." "Exactly," Emily nodded. "But it could be for shorter periods and there would probably be different children coming and going." Lucas frowned, thoughtful. "Does this mean we'll have to share our rooms?" "Probably yes," Richard answered honestly. "We'd have to make some adjustments to the house." Peter, always the most extroverted, smiled broadly. "I think it's amazing. It would be like having new friends all the time." Timothy, the youngest, seemed a little apprehensive. "But what if we really like someone and they have to leave?" Emily knelt beside Timothy, hugging him gently. "That's a very important question, dear. Yes, sometimes it can be hard to say goodbye. But think about how much good we can do, giving these children a safe and loving home even if it's for a short time." Sarah, who had remained thoughtful, finally spoke. "I think we should do this. We have so much. It's our responsibility to help those in need." Richard and Emily exchanged proud looks. Their eldest daughter was becoming a remarkable young woman. "Well," said Richard, looking at each of his children, "are you willing to embark on this new adventure with us?" There was a moment of silence, and then, one by one, each child nodded. Even Timothy, still a little hesitant, gave a small smile and said, "If we can help other children like you helped us, then I want to do it." In the months that followed, the Thompson mansion underwent a major transformation. Rooms were reorganized, common spaces were expanded, and an entire wing of the house was adapted to receive children in temporary foster care. The first child to arrive was Mia, a 6-year-old girl whose mother had been hospitalized. Timothy, remembering how he had felt in his first days at the mansion, was the first to approach her, offering his favorite teddy bear as comfort. Over time, more children came and went. Some stayed for just a few weeks, others for months. Each one left their mark on the Thompson family, and each departure, though sometimes painful, was celebrated as a new beginning for the child in question. One night, after a particularly busy day in which they had received newborn twins whose parents had died in an accident, Richard and Emily found themselves in their usual spot on the porch. "Sometimes I wonder if we're not overburdening the children," Emily confessed, her voice tired but full of emotion. Richard hugged her, kissing the top of her head. "I know what you mean, but look at how they're growing, how they're learning compassion and responsibility. Sarah is already talking about studying social work in college." Emily smiled, remembering how her eldest daughter had spent hours researching the subject. "It's true. And did you see how Lucas created that app to help organize the children's routines? Not to mention how Anna has become an incredible tutor for the younger children," Richard added. "Peter is always organizing games and activities to keep everyone entertained. And Timothy has a special gift for making the scared children feel safe." At that moment, they heard a cry coming from inside the house. One of the twins had woken up. Before they could get up, they heard soft footsteps and Sarah's gentle voice calming the baby. Richard and Emily exchanged emotional looks. Their family had grown and changed in ways they could never have imagined, but the love and compassion that united them had only grown stronger. As they went back inside, ready for another night of challenges and joys, Richard and Emily knew they had made the right choice. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of wealth and status, was now a beacon of hope for needy children, a place where love and compassion flourished in abundance. And so, the Thompson family continued their journey, facing each new challenge with courage and love, knowing that together they could make a difference, one child at a time. Time passed quickly for the Thompson family. Sarah, now 18, was preparing to go to college, determined to pursue a career in social work. Lucas, at 14, was already a technology prodigy, developing apps to help manage the foundation. Anna, at 16, had become a natural leader, coordinating many of the activities for the fostered children. Peter, at 13, used his love for sports to create physical activity programs for the children, while Timothy, at 10, continued to be the emotional heart of the family, always ready with a hug or a kind word. On a sunny Saturday morning, the Thompson mansion was in a flurry of activity. It was Sarah's high school graduation day, and the whole family was preparing for the ceremony. Richard was adjusting his tie in the bedroom mirror when Emily entered, already elegantly dressed. "Can I believe our girl is graduating?" Emily asked, her voice choked with emotion. Richard smiled, pulling her into a hug. "It seems like yesterday that we found her in that car at the dealership." At that moment, they heard a commotion coming from the hallway. As they left the room, they found Sarah surrounded by her siblings and several of the children currently being fostered in the house. "You're all coming to the ceremony, right?" Sarah asked, her face radiant with happiness. Lucas rolled his eyes playfully. "As if we could miss it. You've only been talking about it for the last few weeks." Anna gave Lucas a gentle tap on the arm. "Don't mind him, Sarah. We're all very proud of you." Peter and Timothy nodded enthusiastically, while the younger children jumped with excitement, eager to see Sarah in her graduation gown. The ceremony was emotional. When Sarah's name was called to receive her diploma, the section of the audience occupied by the Thompson family erupted in applause and cheers of joy. Richard and Emily exchanged emotional looks, remembering the entire journey that had brought them here. Later, during the graduation party at the mansion, Richard asked for everyone's attention for a special toast. "Sarah," he began, his voice laden with emotion, "you changed our lives in ways we could never have imagined. Your arrival not only made us parents, but inspired us to open our hearts and our home to so many other children. We are incredibly proud of the young woman you've become and can't wait to see what the future holds for you." Emily continued, "You didn't just graduate from high school today, Sarah. You graduated as a compassionate, strong, and determined person. We know you'll make a difference in the world, just as you did in our lives." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, hugged her parents. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "For giving me a home, a family, and for teaching me the value of helping others." The party continued late into the night with laughter, music, and many shared memories. In a quiet moment, Richard found Emily watching the children dance. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, embracing her. Emily smiled, leaning back against him. "I'm thinking about how our lives have changed, how we've grown. Not just our family, but us as people." Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. "It's true. Who would have thought that couple on the brink of divorce would become this?" He gestured to the scene before them, a house full of love, laughter, and purpose. At that moment, they were interrupted by Timothy, who came running up to them. "Mom, Dad," he said, breathless with excitement, "I just had an amazing idea for the Foundation's next project." As they listened attentively to Timothy's idea, a mentoring program where older children would help younger ones, Richard and Emily felt their hearts swell with pride and gratitude. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and the house had finally quieted, Richard and Emily found themselves in their usual spot on the porch. "You know," Richard said thoughtfully, "when we started the foundation, I thought we were just helping other children, but actually we were creating a legacy." Emily nodded, understanding. "A legacy of love, compassion, and service. And look at our children. They're ready to continue this work, each in their own way." As they watched the stars, Richard and Emily reflected on the incredible journey they had taken. From a couple focused on material wealth to a family dedicated to making a difference in the world, they had grown and changed in ways they could never have predicted. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of status, was now a beacon of hope for needy children. More than that, it was a home in the truest sense of the word, a place of love, acceptance, and infinite possibilities. And so as the night progressed, Richard and Emily silently renewed their commitment. not just to each other or to their children, but to all the children yet to come, all the lives they could still touch. The future was full of promises and challenges, but the Thompson family was ready to face them together, united by love and the desire to make the world a better place, one child at a time. 5 years had passed since Sarah's graduation. The Thompson mansion, always in constant evolution, had become a true center of hope and transformation for needy children throughout New York City. Sarah, now 23, had graduated with honors in social work and was back home working full-time at the family foundation. Lucas, at 19, was in college studying computer science, but continued to develop innovative technologies to help manage the foundation's programs. Anna, 21, was studying psychology, focused on child therapy. Peter, at 18, had just entered college to study physical education, determined to expand the foundation's sports programs. And Timothy, now 15, was already showing a natural talent for administration, helping Richard and Emily with the logistics of various projects. On a Saturday morning, the Thompson family gathered for a special breakfast. Richard and Emily had an important announcement to make. "Children," Richard began, looking proudly at the attentive faces around the table, "your mother and I have been in discussions with the state government for the past few months." Emily continued, "They were impressed with the work our foundation has been doing and made us an interesting proposal." Sarah, always the most perceptive, leaned forward. "What kind of proposal?" Richard smiled. "They want us to expand our foster care model across the state. The idea is to create a network of foster homes based on what we've done here." There was a moment of silence as everyone processed the information. It was Anna who spoke first. "That's amazing. We could help so many more children." Lucas, always practical, asked, "How would it work logistically?" "It would be a big challenge to manage multiple homes." Emily nodded. "Yes, it would be a big challenge. That's why we need all of your help. Each of you has unique skills that will be essential to make this work." Peter smiled broadly. "Count me in to expand the sports programs." Timothy, the youngest but always full of ideas, added, "We could create a mentoring system between the homes where older children help the younger ones." Richard and Emily exchanged proud looks. Their children had truly embraced the spirit of service and compassion that they had worked so hard to instill. "There's one more thing," Richard said, his voice becoming serious. "For this to work, we'll need to move. The idea is to establish a central headquarters in a more accessible area of the city." There was a moment of silence. The mansion had been their home for so many years, witness to so many memories. Sarah was the first to speak. "Well, I think it's time we shared what we have with more people. This house taught us so much about family and love. Now we can take those lessons to other places." One by one, everyone agreed. The move would be a challenge, but it was an opportunity to expand their impact and help even more children. In the weeks that followed, the Thompson mansion became a whirlwind of activity. As they prepared for the move, each family member reflected on the memories they had created there. One night, Richard found Emily on the porch, their special place as always. She was looking out at the garden, where so many children had played over the years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, hugging her from behind. Emily sighed, leaning back against him. "About how it all began. That scared girl sleeping in a luxury car. About how she changed our lives." Richard nodded, vividly remembering that day at the dealership. "It's amazing to think about how we've grown since then. Not just our family, but us as people. You know," Emily said, turning to look into Richard's eyes, "I'm proud of us, of what we've built, of the example we've set for our children." Richard smiled, kissing her softly. "I am too, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." On moving day, the whole family gathered one last time in the mansion's garden. Each shared a favorite memory of the time they had spent there. Sarah spoke about her first night in the house, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. Lucas remembered when he built his first computer in his room. Anna recalled the long conversations she had with Emily in the kitchen, learning to cook and be patient. Peter reminisced about the countless soccer games in the garden. And Timothy, the youngest, talked about how the house was always full of love, no matter how many children came and went. Richard and Emily, hand in hand, looked at their children with eyes full of tears of pride. "This house," Richard said, his voice choked with emotion, was the beginning of something wonderful. But what really matters isn't the walls or the garden. It's the love we share, the family we've built, and the impact we've made together. Emily added, and now we're taking that love and that commitment to a new chapter in our lives. We'll continue to make a difference together. As they left through the mansion's gates for the last time, the Thompson family didn't look back with sadness, but forward with hope and determination. The journey that began with a single child asleep in a luxury car had transformed into a life mission, a legacy of love and compassion that would continue to grow and touch countless lives in the years to come. And so the Thompson family embarked on their new chapter, united by love, strengthened by shared experiences, and determined to continue making a difference in the world, one child at a time. 10 years had passed since the Thompson family left the mansion that was the cradle of their transformation. The Thompson Foundation for Children's Future had expanded beyond their most optimistic expectations, with foster homes spread throughout New York State and support programs benefiting thousands of children annually. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, the Thompson family gathered for a special celebration. It was the 15th anniversary of the foundation, and the garden of the new central headquarters, a spacious property that combined administrative offices with living areas for the children, was filled with people whose lives had been touched by the family's work. Sarah, now 33, circulated among the guests, her face radiant. She had become the foundation's executive director, leading with a mix of compassion and efficiency that impressed everyone. By her side was her husband, a dedicated teacher she had met during her work at the foundation. Lucas, at 29, headed the foundation's technology department. His innovative management and communication systems had revolutionized the way different foster homes connected and shared resources. Anna, at 31, led the foundation's team of psychologists. Her therapy program for traumatized children had become an internationally studied model. Peter, at 28, was responsible for all sports and physical wellness programs. His charisma and contagious energy inspired children of all ages to stay active and healthy. Timothy, the youngest now at 25, had surprised everyone by becoming a skilled fundraiser and public relations officer for the foundation. His ability to tell moving stories about the foundation's work opened doors and hearts wherever he went. At the center of it all, Richard and Emily, now with gray hair but with the same bright eyes as always, proudly observed the legacy they had built, together with their children. "Who would have thought," Richard said softly to Emily, that impulsive decision to take a sleeping girl home would bring us here?" Emily smiled, squeezing her husband's hand. "It was the best impulse you've ever had, my love." At that moment, they were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson?" Turning, they found themselves face to face with a young woman holding the hand of a girl about 7 years old. Richard and Emily took a moment to recognize her, but when they did, their faces lit up with smiles of joy. "Mia?" Emily asked, incredulous. "Is that you?" Mia, the first child they had temporarily fostered so many years ago, smiled broadly. "Yes, it's me. I wanted to thank you personally. The time I spent with you, even though brief, changed my life." Richard and Emily hugged Mia warmly, moved to see how she had grown and become a strong and confident young woman. "And who is this young lady?" Richard asked, smiling at the girl accompanying Mia. "This is Sophie," Mia replied, her face beaming with pride. "My adopted daughter. I was inspired by you. I decided I wanted to give a child the same love and security you gave me." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "Oh, Mia, there are no words to express how much this means to us." Little Sophie looked shyly at Richard and Emily. "Mommy told me stories about you. She said you're like angels who help children." Richard knelt down to be at the girl's level. "Well, Sophie, we're not angels. We're just people who believe that every child deserves love and a chance in life. Just like your mum believes." As they chatted with Mia and Sophie, other familiar faces approached. Former foster children, now adults, came to share their success stories and gratitude. Some had become teachers, others social workers, doctors, artists, each carrying with them the legacy of love and care they had received from the Thompson family. As the afternoon progressed, Richard asked for everyone's attention for a special toast. 15 years ago, he began, his voice laden with emotion. "We started this journey with a simple idea, that love can transform lives. Looking at all of you today, I see that this idea has become a reality in ways we could never have imagined, Emily continued. Each of you carries a part of our family in your hearts, just as we carry you in ours. The work we do isn't about us. It's about creating a world where every child has the chance to grow up in an environment of love, safety, and opportunity. Sarah stepped forward, joining her parents. And this work continues. Every day we face new challenges, but we also see new miracles. Every smile, every hug, every life transformed reminds us why we do this. Lucas, Anna, Peter, and Timothy joined them, forming a circle around their parents. To family, Richard said, raising his glass. Not just to ours, but to the great family that we've all formed together. To family, echoed everyone present, their voices uniting in a celebration of love, hope, and infinite possibilities. As the sun set on the celebration, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Richard and Emily found themselves alone for a moment, observing the scene before them. Children laughed and played in the garden, former foster children chatted animatedly with current staff members, and their own children circulated among the guests, each a living testament to the transformative power of love. You know, Emily said softly, leaning back against Richard, I think I finally understand the true meaning of wealth. Richard nodded, hugging her tighter. It's not about what we have, but about what we give. And about the lives we touch, Emily completed. As they watched the sky darken and the first stars appear, Richard and Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment and gratitude. The journey that had begun with an impulsive act of compassion had transformed into a legacy of love that would continue to flourish for generations. And so, under the starry New York sky, the Thompson family, not just Richard, Emily, and their children, but the entire extended family they had created over the years, celebrated not just the past, but the bright future they would continue to build together, one heart at a time.